post-tension concrete structures are able to achieve efficiencies and spans that the traditional reinforced structures cannot. There is some considerations that you need to consider to make sure you're achieving those efficiencies, and you also make sure there's certain design aspects that are unique to post-tension structures that you need to consider to make sure you don't fall into some of the design traps. My name's Brendan, your structural engineer. Now let's get into it. So what is the difference between a traditional reinforced concrete structure and a post-tension design? Typical reinforced concrete structure use steel reinforcement in the specific location to resist the tension actions. As we all know that concrete is bad in tension, but good under compression. So you reinforce in the locations where the tension forces will be. Whereas a post-tension design will cast in drapes inside your structure to resist those similar forces. So what you do is you put the post-tension cables within your structure, drape them in certain locations, and wait for the concrete to harden. After the concrete is hardened, you apply hydraulic jacks on each end and jack up the building, essentially pre-compressing the building. And because it is pre-compressed, before it sees tension forces, even on areas that tension forces are applied, it needs to overcome those pre-compressive forces that you've applied to the structure before it actually cracks and sees the weakness in a concrete design. In addition to compressing the structure, we also talked about how we drape the different heights of the tendons. This drape applies secondary actions to your building. So in the midpoint, where the drape is at its lowest, so you've got the curve coming up, it pushes the structure up and it allows you to move the load to a place that you need it, such as over supports or beams, meaning that you can have these secondary actions to balance out from one location to the other. So a post-tension design is typically more resistant to cracking and also more efficient through these indirect secondary actions. But these indirect secondary actions is what you need to be carefully consider in your design and detailing of a structure. As we talked about, we're lifting up load in one place and dumping it to the other. We need to make sure that we're limiting those actions, because if we push up too much, we'll have permanent hogging, which will be no good for the structure. Making sure that you're not overstressing the structure and having too much of these secondary actions. This is a problem known as load balancing, and typically you want to only load balance about 80% of the dead load to make sure you haven't overstressed your design. This is similar to what you do in pre-cambering steel structures, as typically there's additional stiffnesses inside your design, so you don't want to make 100% load balancing, you want to be slightly less, as the structure will typically deflect less, as secondary action will come out in columns, beams and walls. So there's a simple formula that you can apply about how you can calculate your balancing forces. So effectively you've got your pre-stress force, you've got the depth of elongation, so how much has it actually dropped from top to bottom, and its length, so you get calculating essentially that curve and how much load is actually applied to it. That pre-compressive force is typically done on the initial stressing force, but what you've got to realize is there's losses that occur from the drape going upwards and down. So you want to make sure that you're only applying 0.8 of the initial stress on the structure. This is because there will be relaxation forces from elongation of the tendon elongating, and also from the tendon riding against the duct and friction forces being applied to the concrete structure. So there's losses that occur throughout your tendon. So by using this formula, you can make sure that you're not overstressing it, making sure that W doesn't become more than 0.8% of the dead load applied to your building. Now, both these factors are unfactored loads, as they're only really about service stresses and not about the ultimate design that you need to consider later. So how can we actually make sure those balance forces don't become too high? There's two ways that you can do this. Or if you want to achieve the most efficient design, you've got even spans, maybe you can just reduce the amount of post-tensioning that you have in the structure. So spanning out tendons further, or putting in less tendons. So instead of using a 5, you may use a 3-strander, so there's less pre-stressed in your building. But most of the time, especially in a multi-span structure, there'll be different spans where you need additional post-tensioning. And it would be inefficient just to apply additional post-tensioning in those locations. So at some points you may lower down the high point, which means that you get a lesser drape from your peak location. Or other aspects, if you've got more tension load on top, you may raise up your bottom load. So not only does this mean that you've got more compression in the top of your structure, but you also have less drape, meaning there's less of those secondary forces. In addition to this, a lot of the time as well, you need to make sure you're achieving a minimum amount of pre-compression in your structure, which is also known as P on A. These pre-compression forces are typically governed by the code or where your building is actually applied. Depending on how much level of cracking you need to resist will be determined what the minimum P&A you can apply to the structure before you either need to reinforce for it or add more post-tensioning. So there's different levels of P&A that you can apply. On the low end, typically around a 0.7. So these are areas such as car park or other areas that are not critical for cracking design. Most commonly, you go to an aspect such as 0.4 MPa pre-compression, which is most aspects, which is your typical pre-compression force and will be what you apply to most structures. But on the higher end, sometimes you need it for either watertight structures such as roof, podium slabs, areas that might have a lot of variability in temperature, such as they've got an internal and external aspect. So you might need to increase the post-tension up to somewhere between 2 to 2.5 and sometimes 3. Then the more pre-compression you have, the more resistance to cracking it has. But what you carefully need to consider when you start going above 3 is how much those pre-compression forces are applying, as they will shorten the slab and have secondary actions that you need to consider. Careful detailing of where your structure is restrained is highly critical to any post-tension design. You can lose a lot of post-tensioning in areas that are restrained. So what does it mean? So if you've got a wall in one location here and a wall in another location, but you're trying to pre-compress these areas, the wall is really stiff and will stop those areas from coming in. So instead of the pre-compression going into the slab where you want it can be potentially applied to the walls themselves, leading to high forces that those walls need to resist. So you either need to make sure that you're carefully detailing where your temporary movement joints are in the structure to make sure you don't get those restraint locations. So restraint is really the killer of post-tension structures and can actually cause things to break if you overstress certain areas. Another area that you may not consider as a restraint location is construction joints. See, when you pour one slab and you have a construction joint on the other side, the slab on the other side, when it gets pre-compressed, will potentially apply additional load to the initial slab. As you've got a joint through there, and as it's adding the pre-compression, load will bleed into the original slab that was poured earlier, as it's already hardened and it's already shortened a fair amount. So in those locations, you need to add additional post-tensioning or preferably additional reinforcement in those areas, as they won't have as much pre-compression as you may think. Now, this is not something that potentially comes in the software, but something you need to carefully consider when detailing those construction joint locations. Another thing that needs careful consideration when you're looking at especially temporary movement joints or even permanent movement joints is the locations that they are. Most of the time, if you go straight through the middle, it's really easy, but sometimes based on different elements, you can't do that. So sometimes you may need to have a moving construction joint. Now, if you put the temporary movement joint in the wrong way, when they try and shrink towards the locations that providing the straight, they can lock up and cause secondary cracking actions. So you're making sure that you're putting the temporary movement joint in such as a way that it doesn't key together and cause those local areas of failure. Your post-tension cables can also cause secondary actions in curvature. They can either make the slab bow up, bow down, or just pre-compress. And this is depending on what height you have that tendon above the neutral axis. So if you have the tendon above the neutral axis, even when flat, it will cause the top to pre-compress in and cause the slab to bow down. Where if you did the opposite on the other side and you just had it in the bottom, you're pre-compressing the bottom force. So that bottom area is getting smaller, causing the areas to come in and causing the slab to bow up. So if you just needed post-tensioning and you didn't need the post-tensioning to apply secondary forces to the load, you need to make sure you're applying it roughly at the neutral axis to make sure you don't have these secondary effects from curvature. Detailing the drapes is arguably one of the most important things that you need to do with post-tension design, and something that can be hardest for people to understand. Where should you put those tendons? There's a couple of simple rules that you should follow. Well, first up, looking at how the slab is deflecting to start off with will allow you to indicate where the column strips are and the middle strips. So where are the supporting elements? So the supporting elements between columns, typically, walls, or even stiff points. So you've got two columns closely located to each other. The slab in between will act as a support location. So that means that the tendon's going up and over and supported by that location to be in the high point, but the tendons going the other direction, in the spanning direction, need to be low at the midpoint. So that's just one way to work out where your tendons need to be. Another way is looking at the bending moment diagram as well. Because typically you want the tendon on the tension face. It's adding most pre-compression to that force. So it will apply additional actions to help pre-compress that location and resist the tension forces. So areas where this becomes really important, especially on cantilevers, is typically on that tendon high. Is that where your tension actions are going to be? So looking at the bending moment diagram, you can see where the tension forces are, and typically that's where you want to have it on the high, where the tension forces are above the slab, or on the bottom, where the tension forces are below the slab. Something you may not see as well is the amount of drape will help with pulling the tension forces from one location to the other. So if you've got support locations such as band beams or column strips, what you want to try and be doing is putting the high point on one side of that column strip or band beam, but also then keeping it flat between the other location, have two high points. This means that you'll have a greater drape in between, meaning you're pouring more of the critical forces from the critical location of the mid slab and dumping it more on the column strip or band beam, meaning that you're moving more of the force from where they are to where they need to be. And this will potentially have a great help on improving your deflections by dragging loads from where they are most critical. One program that I would recommend that will help with your post-tension design greatly is a program called RACT. See, RACT will not only allow you to drag forces quickly and more effectively from where they are to where they're going, as you can play with tendons and immediately have a feedback option. With something like RAM Concept, which is a whole slab design, it can be quite hard to understand what is the actual effects that you're having from moving a single tendon. In addition to looking at where your high points are and your low points are, you want to make sure that you're breaking your tendons in the correct location, making sure your tendons are either not too long or not too short. So a tendon typically has to be at least about 5 meters. Anything less than that, you won't get the pre-compression force into the slab, making it really inefficient, and it'll just be acting like reinforcement. However, on the other end, you want to make sure that your tendons are not more than about 40 meters. At more than 40 meters, you'll have too much losses through that design, making the pre-compression forces really ineffective. And when you're getting up near these lengths, you want to make sure that you're flipping the live and dead ends, as the live end is where the force is being applied. This is where you're getting the most pre-compression forces. So by flipping the live and dead length, you can expand your tendon lengths upwards of about 40 meters. But this is really where the inefficiencies will start to drop off dramatically. So typically, the most efficient location for your tendons are somewhere between 12 to 26 to 30 meters. Within this distance, you'll have the most efficiency out of your post-tension structures. And one of the most critical areas when you're doing post-tension design is how you get through folds. Folds quite typically happen in slabs, as sometimes you need to step down the top of the slab for either the finishes or drainage. So how can you get the post-tension structure through there? You think, oh, you just bend it through. However, there's secondary forces from that drape that can cause critical areas to crack. So before you start that drape, you want to make sure that the soffit of the slab is actually stepped down. So we're going across, and we haven't actually changed the divergence until we've gone past the step of the soffit. And then when we do drop it down, we want to make sure that we're going no more than about 1 to 6 or even shallower where possible. And we also want to make sure that we're stopping the divergence of that location before we get to the top of the slab stepping down, to make sure the divergence is occurred all the way through that step, as those locations at the top and the bottom will push up in different areas that can cause the tendon to pull through the slab and cause a local failure. So typically when you're dealing with this, you want to make sure the width of the fold is 8 to 10 times the depth of the height change. This means that you can do the divergence within it and not cause those critical areas of failure. And sometimes you do need to apply additional reinforcement in that area, such as stirrups, to tie the tendons down, especially when you've got high actions. Now, lateral divergence of tendons can also happen within slabs when you've got service rises or other aspects. So sometimes tendons need to diverge around these locations. But similar to the secondary actions that occur in a slab fold, you want to make sure that divergence occurs before that location. You also want to limit how much divergence actually occurs, as the greater divergence, the greater the force that's applied when you stress that tendon up. So most of the time, you want to make sure you're not diverging more than about 1.5 meters. Any more than that, you'll have excessive forces on your structure. It's checking that your beams and slab are of the correct depth is also something that's extremely important. And there's a simple factor called big K, which is talking about the tensile forces that the structure receives. For a beam, you want to make sure that you're somewhere between a 5. A 5 means that you've got an efficient post-tension structural design. However, that same big K in a slab will not apply, as typically you'll have too high deflections. So you use this same factor, big K, but use it at a reduced rate. And typically I find limiting big K to around 3, the slab will achieve the same efficiencies and not have roughly too much deflections, but it's something that you need to really play around with. As sometimes you might be adding more and more post-tensioning, it's just because your structure doesn't have enough depth to it. But also, and likewise, you want to make sure your structure is not too deep, as the dead weight is potentially killer for your overall structural design and design efficiencies. So you want to make sure you're checking those design efficiencies and where your K specifically lies. Now that we've learned about some of the critical ways and things that we need to watch out for in a post-tension design, you may be interested in the simple rules of thumb of concrete design that will help bring your designs to the next level. And if you're interested in supporting the channel, there's 2 ways that you can do this. You can either become a YouTube member or sign up to be one of my patrons. Without the support of my YouTube members or patrons, this type of content would not be possible. And as always, stay safe, keep learning, and I'll see you next week. Bye.